PopCap's a household name for many back in the early 2010s due to their huge category of well-crafted games: Bejeweled, Peggle, Zuma, Heavy Weapon, and many more. They didn't make gritty games with epic stories and cool effects, but casual games that anyone could comprehend. You could give a young child or the elderly Bejeweled and they would understand their premise. Not only were their games simple, but accessible. All of PopCap's old games used one input, just the mouse. No worrying about keybinds or what did this and what did that. It created a comforting feeling that you could expect all of their games to be easy to control. The basic philosophy of creating unique and infinitely replayable games with simple controls heavily contributed to their success. So with that in mind, I want to talk about a game from that era which stands out from PopCap's library for a long list of reasons. And that game is Chuzzle. Chuzzle is a puzzle game where you aim to match 3 or more of the same colored Chuzzles by dragging rows that loop around the board. It might sound basic, but me saying the concept out loud really doesn't do it justice because it's addicting to play. If you got smarts or lots of luck, matching 5 Chuzzles at once will make a super Chuzzle that explodes. 6 or more will make a super Chuzzle and add a ton of score, though there's more to it than that. If you pop so many Chuzzles that the space is available, a fat Chuzzle can drop down, which takes up the space of 4 Chuzzles. Fat Chuzzles can't wrap around the board and move 2 rows at once, allowing you to make more creative moves at a trade-off. Blocks will show up occasionally and drop onto a random Chuzzle, imprisoning it. It will be unable to move the row that the locked Chuzzle is in, so it can be detrimental if that happens to a row a fat Chuzzle is also in. This is the fun of Chuzzle, cleverly planning and maneuvering around the game's steadily increasing obstacles with flying colors until you come crashing down with no more moves. And that's what makes it addicting, the strive to try and try again, repeatedly thinking you can do a little bit better. But let's say you want some more challenge than that. You don't want a puzzle game that lets you move at your own pace. You want to be pushed until there's nothing left. Well, can you erase time itself? Speed Chuzzle is an alternate game mode where the core concept is flipped on its head. You're not in control of the game is controlling you, constantly applying pressure as the timer fills up faster and faster while you level up. It feels rewarding, but not enough, so you keep going and going as more locks start to drop in, the playable parts of the board shrinking lock by lock. And after a good game, it's time to kick back and Zen Chuzzle, where you can't lose. Match enough Chuzzles to get decorations on the screen displaying how much time you've spared or lost in Zen. Maybe matching's not for you. Perhaps you want instructions on what to do. Mindbender is the final mode that really makes you think. You're given a pattern to recreate using scattered Chuzzles everywhere. It gets complicated real fast, and it's impossible to not get lost in what you're doing. Chuzzle is special. There's endless replay value and something for all kinds of players, which is what makes it incredibly interesting. One aspect of Chuzzle is the rich and special development history it had. Chuzzle was not developed by PopCap, but it was published by them. The real creator of this craft was Raptisoft, a third-party developer that worked alongside PopCap. Raptisoft is an independent company made up of John Raptis and just John Raptis. Raptis goes all the way back to PopCap in 2001. Raptisoft released a game called Eggsucker. Eggsucker was a clone of Puzzle Bobble, but Raptis felt validated in making it because the original developers said they weren't going to make a PC version. Though, since his game was a clone, he sold it online for the minimum price online sellers would let him. The success of Eggsucker caught PopCap's eye and reached out to him saying, "You could be making much more money with us." This resulted in Raptis working at PopCap from 2002, working on some games like Atomica Deluxe and Candy Train. In 2004, he left PopCap to pursue making his own games independently and jump from project to project freely. However, PopCap didn't want to just end their relationship like that, so they approached him once more. They offered to publish his games, and he'd get to develop them independently and make any spin-offs or sequels as long as PopCap had first refusal. A year later, and a Fuzzy Ball hit the market to huge success. Chuzzle became one of PopCap's all-star games, earning a special spot on the website. A few years later in 2008, a special yet really confusing version was released. Chuzzle Christmas Edition. Christmas Edition is what it sounds like. The original Chuzzle redone visually to be festive themed with new sound effects to go alongside it. In 2009, Chuzzle came to iPhone and iPod, letting you bring Chuzzles anywhere you want. Chuzzle as a franchise was incredibly solid now. Yeah, there's some weird stuff like Chuzzle Christmas Edition, but the important bases were covered. Casual PC gaming was fizzling out, and the jump to mobile was necessary. Everything seemed to be going well for PopCap and Raptisoft, until the acquisition. On July 12, 2011, EA acquired PopCap, and everything that wasn't Plants vs. Zombies pretty much bit the dust. All of the old PopCap games stopped being maintained, and eventually, they were delisted from mobile, including Chuzzle's original port. Now, things got a bit tricky for Raptisoft because of his original contract with PopCap. If Raptisoft wanted to make any more Chuzzle games, he'd need approval from PopCap, but they're owned by EA now, and Plants vs. Zombies is their main focus. So why bother with this Chuzzle thing? This resulted in Raptisoft being unable to use the Chuzzle IP, leaving it as a franchise in the past. Sort of. In 2015, EA was making slot games based off old PopCap franchises, and they wanted to make a Chuzzle Slots game. However, the contract. This required EA to reach out to Raptisoft for permission. Raptisoft signed off on the deal, and Chuzzle Slots was born. And then, back to your regularly scheduled nothing. Until 2017, there was a weird legal mishap when EA reviewed Raptisoft's contract, and they just decided to give Raptisoft the IP back. With Chuzzle back in Raptisoft's hands, he immediately got to work making Chuzzle 2, which was released in 2018. While Raptisoft got the Chuzzle IP, EA still owns the trademark, so it's weird. According to ChatGPT, the Mona Lisa was finished on May 12, 2005, which is weird because that was the day Chuzzle released. But they're both works of art, so maybe it got mixed up. Speaking of art, Chuzzle has a vibrant and colorful art style, bright colors and rainbows everywhere with many moving parts and effects. The Chuzzles fur moves with the rose movement and are incredibly expressive if you mess with them. If you hover your cursor over a Chuzzle for too long, it'll get annoyed and throw it away, and sometimes create a chain of Chuzzles throwing your cursor between them until it exits the board. If you right-click a Chuzzle, it'll squeak at you. Left-click repeatedly and it'll shake, cough, and sneeze so hard that its fur pops off, leaving it bald. If you sit idle for long enough, Chuzzles will roll their eyes. Eventually, they'll fall asleep and can only be woken by moving your mouse over them. If you shake an entire row back and forth quickly, all the Chuzzles will get dizzy and roll their eyes in circles. In the old mobile port, shaking your phone makes them dizzy too. Raptisoft, if you're watching this, make Chuzzle plushes and send me one, please. Thank you. The special interactions with the Chuzzles make the game feel much more personal and expressive compared to other games from PopCap. The Jewel has this mature, divine creation vibe, but Chuzzle stands out with its unique personality. Another factor in Chuzzle's unique personality is the music. It's weird, bizarre, and totally unique. The only way I can really describe it is kind of like Splatoon music with all the weird vocal pops and synths. Each game mode has its own theme. Classic, Speed, and Zen all have distinct songs, while Mind Better and Bechuzzed reuse the classic track. There are also separate tracks for viewing high scores and trophies. To keep the game playable on a NASA PC or a toaster, PopCap compressed the music heavily, and for 19 years, we've had those same compressed tunes until the awesome Blue discovered that a Bejeweled CD with a trial to Chuzzle had the original uncompressed tracks. Look! Listen to that quality difference. I've linked a download in the description to the HD music alongside a file that you can drop into your Chuzzle directory to replace the old compressed tracks. The music for Chuzzle is not only a certified banger, but it somehow conveys emotion to me. Listening to it makes me feel nostalgic for an era I wasn't part of, but it doesn't feel that old too. Chuzzle can only be described as timeless. Most classic PopCap games relied on beating high scores as the player's main motivation, but Chuzzle outdid it with the inclusion of trophies. Trophies are earned by completing certain challenges, like popping 7 Chuzzles in one move, detonating 3 Super Chuzzles at once, or clearing 2 Speed Chuzzles without triggering a warning. Trophies are a great challenge and add a satisfying sense of progression, and it keeps track of the time you got them so you can grow old and look back fondly on your Chuzzle days. There's still more to talk about though, like Chuzzle Christmas Edition. Christmas Edition was released 5 years later in 2008 as a festive repaint of the original game. You're unable to play it today without piracy, as neither PopCap or Raptisoft sell it, effectively making it abandonware. The existence of Chuzzle Christmas Edition is a bit funny because of the concept, but it's still charming nonetheless. And that's what Chuzzle offers. I adore Chuzzle so much for everything it does because it feels like something truly special. It's so nice to see the IP flourish today with Chuzzle 2, and I hope Raptisoft has more things in store in the future. Chuzzle exists to be remembered, and that's what this video exists for, to spread the word and celebrate its 20th anniversary. Happy 20 years, Chuzzle. Nowadays, it's so common for huge companies to sit on IPs with potential and let them rot. Even when PopCap was independent from EA, they refused to port Chuzzle to mobile for some reason. In response, Raptisoft did it himself without their help. And then they gloated to IGN about how well it is for their library on mobile. Cool. I think all of this makes Chuzzle stand for something great. No matter how complicated it may be, how challenging it is to overcome, if you have a set vision, you can achieve it if you're willing to put in the time and effort to reach it. 13 years of waiting from Chuzzle to Chuzzle 2, and the payoff was wonderful. What makes these old games appeal to me so much is that they deliver what they promise. I don't like most modern games now. Pay $40 to $70 for a game that'll probably be unfinished, with the promise of delivering content via free updates, even though that content is really just finishing stuff that should have been in the game at launch. Live service in general is something I'm a bit tired of, and that's why indie is my preferred style. Why support an industry that treats their workers like dirt, laying them off when the overworked employees don't fit outlandish quotas, and then giving yourself millions of dollars in bonuses for your quote-unquote hard work? Stop giving money to these people. Older games like Chuzzle don't try to manipulate your attention by dangling live events in front of you to keep you playing, encouraging you to gamble for progression, spam you with notifications desperate for your attention, or attempt to get you addicted in hopes you'll spend more money. These games respect you and your time. They're available if you want to spend time with them, and if you don't, that's okay. The game will wait for you. I know this video isn't about Chuzzle 2, but I want to give it a shout out since it's one of the few modern mobile games that I consider actually good. It's like the original, yet doesn't do anything the current market does. No annoying notifications or intrusive monetization. It's just a game, not something trying to force its way into your life. The attention to detail makes this game feel much more personal. Most of the time, when I open Chuzzle, I'm there to watch the Chuzzles. The game is fun and easy to get lost in, but I like seeing their interactions. Rolling eyes, squeaking, or getting mad. It characterizes them so much. Now, while the retrospect part of this video is over, I want to go over a few things with Mr. Rapis himself. I contacted him to do a Q&A for this video, and even got my hands on the Chuzzle Postmortem, which I'll be sharing too. Let's get started. How were Chuzzles created?
Here's the funny history of Chuzzle. I had to come up with a sliding mechanic, and then I was like, okay, what should slide? PopCap wanted me to make it like a slot machine, sliding lemons, bells, those sorts of things. For kicks, I made the pieces into Pac-Man ghosts. I was big into Pac-Man as a kid, and when you matched them, Pac-Man would come in from the side of the screen, eat them, and their eyes would fly off. God, I wanted to use that concept. I fell completely in love with it. Obviously, a non-starter. Then my wife said, maybe you should make it so you slide the little caterpillars and they turn into butterflies when they match. I hated that idea. I couldn't let go of the idea of the eyes flying off, but got fuzzy caterpillars stuck in my head, and voila, fuzzy balls. I think I was thinking of those Weeple things from the 80s. That entire saga above happened in under 6 hours, by the way.
How were you introduced to PopCap? It seems like you have a history with them even before Chuzzle with games like Eggsucker and Dynamite. They seem to completely own those IP, while Chuzzle is something they only published.
So I wrote Eggsucker back in 2001 and put it up on the web for super cheap. The reason being it was a clone. I knew it was a clone, but the Busta Move people had announced that they were never going to publish it to PCs, so I figured that it was a green light. All the same, it was still a clone, so I priced it at the minimum price you could sell a game with an online seller in those days, and was a little shocked because only 6 months later, it was earning nearly what my day job was earning. Didn't expect that. Shortly after that, John Vecchi at PopCap contacted me and basically said, what the heck are you doing? You could be making a lot of money for this. At that point, we had just entered into publishing contracts, and I still had the IP for Eggsucker, which got renamed to Dynamite, and was actually rewritten 100% from scratch into the PopCap framework in only a month and a half. I had so much energy back in those days. A couple years later, PopCap was growing pretty big, and Dynamite was falling off in earnings, so they made me a full buyout so they'd have the IP free and clear up PopCap games. I wish I hadn't done that now, because I probably would have written at least one sequel and definitely ported it to mobile if I still had the IP.
Were you aware when the EA buyout was being processed, or was it held internally a secret until the public was informed, since you aren't part of PopCap, but rather an outside developer?
I didn't know anything until the last second. I might have known a day before it was announced. When it happened, I was riding high and putting out lots of games, so I was kind of lost in my own world.
Did the EA buyout impact you directly? With PopCap no longer being a publisher, what happened to your contract?
The contract was unchanged. Silly optimistic me, I thought that EA buying PopCap would give the game more visibility, but turns out EA wasn't buying PopCap so much as they were buying Plants vs. Zombies. So Chuzzle 1 and every other PopCap game began to vanish. Things were changing so fast that it would need updating every few years everywhere but Windows.
What was your relationship like with PopCap back then?
I think okay. We had some tense moments because I was a really high-energy, optimistic dork most of the time and wanted to do grand things. My sense of humor also clashed with a few key PopCap personnel, but in general, I remained on speaking terms, and I believe that if I would have approached them about a game idea or whatnot, it would have happened. I got along very well with the three founders, but I think it felt like a bit of a stab in the back to them when I told them I quit. It wasn't. I'm just an insanely capricious person and am always dancing around to a new project, which is why I have so many games that do not in any way share an audience. Like the Chuzzle audience and the Hamsterball audience almost have no overlap, and this has kind of prevented my company from hitting any sort of critical synergy. I actually asked them if they wanted to do a Chuzzle 2 at some point around 2008, but they didn't want to at the time because Chuzzle was still a big seller. They didn't want to put out a game that would compete with itself.
What is your relationship with PopCap/EA now?
I almost have no relationship with any of EA, and my last communication with them was about a clarification that still hasn't been answered. I still sometimes talk to one of the PopCap founders, though very, very rarely. Everyone has kind of moved on, and those guys are the kind of rich now where you agonize over what color yacht to buy. I did show one of the founders Chuzzle 2 when I released it, but we didn't talk much about it.
You've mentioned that EA owned the trademark on the word Chuzzle. Does that still stand?
Yep. I spent a lot of time waiting for it to expire, but I think they have armies of lawyers and accountants. I'm sure they watch that stuff and hang on to things forever. It's like an asset on their balance sheets, I'm sure.
You've said that the rights through unusual circumstances came back to you. Could you elaborate on what happened? Does that include the trademark or only the IP rights? Chuzzle is actually one of the randomly assigned player names you can get if you don't bother creating your own in PvZ3, which started its soft launch in early 2024 before being cancelled. So, are they able to use it, or is it simply a reference?
I would not like to talk about it too much because I'm not 100% sure what exactly happened, but there is a situation where something minor in one of my contracts got overlooked, and they seemed very willing to go ahead and give me back the IP when we discussed it. I have no idea if I'm reading anything into that or not, and have no idea if what went on over there, but I was delighted that I got Chuzzle back. The web is full of bad stories about EA, but my experience with them has been superb. EA owns the word, utterly and completely. I own the IP, and Raptisoft is entitled to produce any and all Chuzzle games that I so desire. I'm not 100% sure what would happen if they suddenly decided I can't use the word Chuzzle, like what the legal battle would look like, but I think mostly the point is I can't sue them to stop using the word Chuzzle, but I can't imagine why I would want to do that anyway.
What's the deal with Chuzzle Christmas Edition? Why does that exist? And why isn't it sold anymore on the Raptisoft site? Do you not own the rights to that specific version?
I actually didn't realize there was any kind of demand for it. Why, does it exist? I was in a good mood one day, and as Christmas was approaching, I went to PopCap and said, hey, what if I went all on my own with no investment on your part, and reskinned all of Chuzzle with a Christmas theme? Would you guys sell that? And they were like, sure, let's do it. That's just how things worked back then with smaller companies amongst the video game guys. You didn't have to do any planning or get on schedule, it was just throwing stuff together and putting it out.
Could you give a percentage on how far the PC port of Chuzzle 2 is complete? My friends and I are eagerly waiting.
I could give you a copy that runs on PC right now. It was developed on PC and ported to mobile. But it'd play in a long, tall window like a phone. But I planned to do a PC port from the very beginning, so all of these things have easy to adjust variables so I can move around where the board is, where the bottle is, etc. And I've started this process before starting Hamsterball 2. So it's about 25% done, and I only haven't worked on it because, again, I didn't think there was a demand. Here's my excuse for that. When the PC casual industry crashed, it crashed hard and all went to mobile. It's surprising to me to find out that people actually do want a Chuzzle 2 for PC, and now, knowing that, while things here are too unsettled to resume to Hamsterball 2, I'll get Chuzz 2 for PC done. In theory, it won't take that long.
Speaking of Chuzzle 2's PC port, you've mentioned it will be on Steam. Will it also be available on Raptisoft.com, like the original? Will anything related to Chuzzle Snap be included?
Yeah, I'll sell it to Raptisoft. I couldn't tell you right this second if Chuzzle Snap would be included. As of this second, no, but I've been meaning to move Snap to Chuzzle 2 as an alternative mode for a while, because the mobile OSs are monsters about deprecating code, so you have to recompile and tweak every single app you have every couple years. It gets hard to maintain the ones that aren't popular, and Snap isn't very popular.
What is the Chuzzle lore?
About a year later, I was talking on an indie message board and someone asked the same question. What the heck is wrong with your brain and this Chuzzles thing? And so I was in a mood and I typed, okay, I've been keeping this a secret, but you're in fact playing as the evil wizard. Like Gargamel from Smurfs, and how Gargamel always wanted the Smurfs to turn into gold, that's what you're doing with collecting the essence of Chuzzles in a bottle. The Chuzzle 2 lore is that an extremely aggressive but cute species wanders the cosmos, then lands on planets and forces funkification on the hapless inhabitants, whether they want it or not. Direct sequel to the wizard in Chuzzle 1 screwing up his experiment. Didn't calculate right. Destroy the universe. Wizards do that sometimes. I just added that last bit just now.
Can we get a third-person shooter soon?
I will not rule this out because, as noted above, the entire universe is in serious danger. I'm picturing something like Mass Effect.
And now, Raptis sent me a postmortem with some beta screenshots and behind-the-scenes stuff to show, so I'll be doing that.
Okay. Here's a brief history of the trials and tribulations of making Chuzzle. There actually weren't many tribulations in making Chuzzle that weren't intentional human error, or people just trying to make each other's lives miserable, but this was an opportunity for some detail of the development process for other developers. This won't be very interesting for a non-developer, it may not even be interesting to a developer. Chuzzle began as a faint game idea over summer 2005 and became a game mock-up around September 15th or around the 20th, 2005. I don't remember the exact date. I always had a lot of difficulty making a game mock-up as opposed to jumping right in with the game's full graphics, but to interest PopCap, I wanted a version of the game mechanic out and ready to go as soon as possible. I sent a version of Chuzzle with a 10x10 grid made of sliding blocks. Jason Kapalka at PopCap was interested, so we set about looking for a theme. My wife suggested sliding fuzzy caterpillars that made match up and turn into butterflies. Jason Kapalka suggested a slot machine type theme, sliding lemons and cherries and such like. Neither of those really lit the fire for me, and while complicating things, I was going through some bizarre Pac-Man nostalgia phase. For fun, I made a version of the game where you slide Pac-Man goats, which when you match them up, they turn blue, and a Pac-Man would zoom in and eat them, leaving the eyes to fly off screen. For a while, I was so enamored with that idea, I wanted to try and reach Namco and beg for the rights. My wife came in, made a face, and said, "That's no fun. You should use, fuzzy caterpillars." The original Chuzzles were rendered without any special plugins, and they looked like this. It's just a spear in 3ds Max messed up with a noise modifier. I started working a bit with my artist friend Gary Clare on making the Chuzzles more interesting. Gary's a concept artist of astounding talent, as his wife suggested that the game should be giving a 70s theme. Soon, we were looking at this mockup. It was also around this time that my male friends started goofing on me about the name Chuzzle, anticipating issues with colorblindness and going a little over the edge with the irrational enthusiasm. I played with the Chuzzles wearing costume to help identify color, so the very first playable Chuzzle with fuzzballs looked like this. This wasn't even playable for 10 minutes. It became difficult to find matches, the costumes were too distracting, and putting the costumes on the Chuzzles by color gave the game a horrid, offensively symmetrical aesthetic. Around this time, I got the Shag hair plugin and made a fuzzy ball using it. What I immediately saw was that the Chuzzles' hair could pulse and ripple and otherwise react when you slid them around. Soon I had Chuzzles rendered in 8 different colors with about 200 animation frames each, taking up approximately 10 megabytes of space, which is larger than a full game would have been in those days. But do first, optimize later. That is how a Chuzzle looked in 3ds Max, by the way. The purple thing is the Chuzzle itself. As you can see, the core is very small. The rectangle with an arrow sticking out of it is actually a wind modifier. When you're seeing a Chuzzle poof from getting dragged in the game, you're actually watching wind blow from it in the other direction. However, there was a problem now. With the Chuzzle pulsing and moving, the costumes look horribly static, like cardboard overlays over a movie, so because there was no real way around this, the costumes were tossed. Now that all the graphic concepts were done, I cranked up some old music and started to code and made up menus and sound effects. People have asked about Chuzzle sound effects, which sound very retro arcadey. Here's how they were made. I downloaded an Atari 800 emulator, one of the machines of my strapping youth, and began writing a little basic programs to make sound. And boy, let me tell you, in this day and age of text editors and fast code, you've been blown away what we had to work with back in those days. Anyway, using Atari Basic, I managed to make some almost pleasing sound, but by using Gold Wave and giving them a slight speed modification and flanges and various audio mixing, and made them exactly what I was looking for. So don't bother trying to duplicate a Chuzzle sound in Atari Basic. Every sound is actually 2 to 3 basic program sounds mixed together and peppers with so many effects and adjustments that I couldn't even duplicate them now. But I did capture that retro arcade beeps and bloops I was looking for. Okay. So in about a month and a half, I had a finished game ready for PopCap, and by finished, I mean I could have released it on my own site and started selling it. In the context of PopCap, finished here means ready to start on it. Here's what Chuzzle version 1.0 Raptisoft looked like. These are all my month and a half graphics with no PopCap makeover. So you can see it looks different, but the same, sort of embryonic. And yeah, some of you will notice Chuzzle Duel there on the menu. That last screenshot is from Chuzzle Duel, which is a completely multiplayer version of Chuzzle thrown in, and if you believe them, just to give PopCap ulcers. It was eventually taken out because it was considered to be a tech support and QA nightmare, alas. Though I am currently positioning them to allow me to release it as freeware. Basically, what you did was make matches, while your opponent did the same. You could watch him in that little window over the bottle. Whenever you filled the bottle completely, you were given a bomb that you could drop on your opponent. A bomb consisted of 2 locks getting thrown onto his screen. Accumulating bombs so that you could drop 6 to 8 locks on him at one time was the order of the day. Your choice was, use locks now and prevent him from making as many matches, or store up locks in the hopes of hitting him where no more moves. Nobody ever lost in this. You basically just played until you were finished, checking who had the highest score or the most locked boards or whatever. Although my wife and I enjoyed it, in the end, I gave to PopCap's wishes and put Mindbender in instead. Now, some stats for the developer-minded stats freak. Chuzzle had, at this time, looked like this. So, like I said, it was complete. After optimizing the graphics for size, I figured I could go out. So optimistic was I, the journey was nearly done, that I nearly optimized the graphics myself. I got Chuzzle down to a 2 megabyte download, and even managed to make an ActiveX version. Surely it was now time to rest. Direct date is not acceptable, says Jason Kapalka to me. That's how he talks, really. Bold, bald statements, an iron wall of will, as in you will be defeated. Why won't you move it to the PopCap framework? Why didn't I? The PopCap framework is a very good coding framework, but when I wrote Chuzzle, I started doing some fancy schmancy things with special effects that weren't common in 2D games back then. For instance, a lot of my effects in Chuzzle involved complicated matrices to rotate, scale, orbit, and otherwise twist graphics into all types of shapes. I'd worked with the PopCap framework extensively since Dynamite, but had coded the Chuzzle framework to essentially be the PopCap framework, conform to my extreme laziness and ennui. So, for instance, in the PopCap framework, you make a button and then maintain its states, setting up a widget to move the button, handle the button, destroy the button, etc. In my own framework, you'd make a button with 1 or 2 lines and forget it ever happened. I had implemented a whole lot of things since they were completely geared towards the capricious art programmer whose creative bursts were often short-circuited by having to write 50 lines of code across 3 classes just to make a piece of game UI work. Plus, I was doing all those matrix math transformations for those special effects. The PopCap framework, at the time, couldn't handle that, and the effects were very subtle that I felt were necessary to keep the whole thing going. Did you know that all the Chuzzles are drawn as parallelograms that change their corners randomly about 5 pixels? Probably not, but in the game it makes it look a lot more organic than if they were just static. You can see the difference by playing it in software mode versus hardware mode. There's no effect in software mode. See the difference? Other factors existed. In my previous machinations with PopCap, the memory footprint of the game became an issue. The PopCap framework has double memory footprint for graphics, the framework that keeps a version around, and Managed DirectX keeps a version around. In my framework, only the managed version was around, so I was free to make more graphics without having to worry about overstepping a 64 megabyte limit while in software mode. At this time, the Chuzzles were not colorized, they were all pre-rendered every color because I was able to make them look a little finer that way. And besides, I love my multi-resolution option. From my perspective, moving into the PopCap framework would be impossible without cutting some of the quality out of the game. I'll move it to Direct 7, I said, but I don't think I can make it work with the PopCap framework as is. This didn't go over great. I don't remember all the details of this particular battle. I don't even remember how I won it, because if I had to do it all over again, I would just move it to the PopCap framework and be done with the game 3 months earlier. So an empty victory, Jason will be sighing with pleasure somewhere as he reads these words. John from 2025 note, I most definitely should have moved it to the PopCap framework. The move to Direct 7 went fairly smooth at this time. Anyone who's worked with Direct 8 and then dropped down to Direct 7 will know what I went through here. You go from a DirectX incarnation that allows you to initialize DirectX with one line to an incarnation that requires a carefully followed 12-step horror story just to get things to a point where you can draw things on the screen. So when I say fairly smoothly, I mean it took 2 weeks. As in, can you believe I dropped it from DirectX 8 to DirectX 7 in only 2 weeks? There were some side effects. DirectX 8 does an astounding job of managing textures and making sure reinitialization goes okay, and DirectX 7, I found that the easiest way to go from full screen to windowed and vice versa was just reinitializing everything all over again. More on the stuff later. So dropping to DirectX 7 wasn't hard, then Jason drops another bomb on me. Don't you have a software mode, he says? Well, I didn't. I was of the opinion that software mode was overrated. Chuzzle is so very low polygon, I'm sure even a voodoo card could run it. Does anyone not have 3D acceleration these days? Well, it turns out that some people have machines that won't even allow you to initialize Direct 3D. All in all, probably 10 to 30% of people who buy casual games have a computer configuration such that it will not work properly with hardware acceleration. They'll see graphic glitches, they won't be able to load in textures, it'll run slower than it would in software, just all kinds of problems. Okay, so I had to have software rendering. That would be easy enough, except that, I had just done all these matrix transformations. Now I needed a software triangle rasterizer. Paul Nettle to the rescue. Paul Nettle's the guy who did the physics collision for Hamsterball, and he's essentially a low-key nicer version of John Carmack. Note, I base my Carmack slander on the book Master of Doom. I commissioned him to write a fast triangle rasterizer that could overwrite a 640 by 480 screen 6 times and still maintain a 30 FPS frame rate on an 800 megahertz P2. And he did it, with alpha and everything. How amazing is that? Now that Chuzzle was down to DirectX 7 and could render software, it was time to begin some PopCap QA and beta testing. Jason Kapalka has told me I should throw down some holy hosannas to the PopCap QA department in this postmortem, and I will do that, difficult though as it may be. There's a natural apathy between developers and QA. We developers feel that QA keeps hitting us with pointless minor bugs, such as the program crashing every startup, and QA feels that we developers keep putting things in programs that make them run less efficiently, like graphics. That said, the PopCap QA department is like a finely forged sword. They cut right into the heart with no effort whatsoever. They have some magical method to their madness that literally lets them find everything. Hey, if you drag a row of Chuzzles, then right-click, then double left-click, and, still holding the right mouse button down, it'll crash if you're dragging the Chuzzle in the upper left corner. This was an actual bug. I had some trouble duplicating it myself because I just don't have the reflexes, but lo and behold, if you manage to duplicate this perfectly, it tries to reference a Chuzzle at array position -1, and boom, crash. Chuzzle had few very major game bugs. What Chuzzle had a lot were bugs caused by my decision to not use the PopCap framework. 99% of these bugs that you or I will never notice because we bought a new computer since 1995. PopCap has a QA setup with literally every machine possible, and what DirectX does on some of these older machines makes you wonder how anyone started using DirectX at all. PopCap's framework is essentially a software framework with a hardware layer thrown on top of it by the PopCap employee that everyone calls Ace, because calling him that motherfucker who can do freaking anything, how the hell did he do that, is too long. So when the PopCap framework is well suited for these older machines, in its native state, it was designed for 1995. Now, my own framework, I'll call it RAP to distinguish it, is a hardware framework with a software layer thrown into it by Paul Nettle. This means that my framework, run on a 1995 machine, is already at a disadvantage. Well, we found a few small bugs related to this, and I fixed them, and I sort of thought that the issue was closed. Little did I know that QA had only touched the tip of the iceberg in their testing process, but they went on to other things, and I happily set out finishing Chuzzle. Ignorance is bliss. So, we're looking at the time period from around mid-October to mid-December here. I had hopes of finishing Chuzzle up for Christmas, but well, you know, there's a reason hope was at the bottom of Pandora's box, because it was the worst of them. Okay, so final note from 2025 John. I entered the original postmortem here because I started a new game and never ended up returning to it. What I would have written here was a series of what I considered to be very unpleasant iterations of what we did to Chuzzle to make it more appealing or understandable. I'll list a few things, making it so non-matching moves were allowed, making Chuzzles have to be in a straight row column to match, and my own personal least favorite, removing the locks from the game and rebalancing it completely in some sort of insane race to the bottom of a casual video game difficulty. I can't think of anything from this era that remained in the game. It was an entirely pointless December through March playing around so that everyone could get their 2 cents in. I was embittered by this, because this delay allowed a Chuzzle-like game called Barnyard Invasion to beat Chuzzle to the market with a similar mechanic. It played quite differently, but did involve sliding rows, and I was convinced the game was going to take a hit from that. That ultimately didn't happen, but those months were so full of, okay, change this, followed by, ugh, change it back, that I got exhausted, even panicked. Artists and programmers are not the most stable of people, and when you're both, you're getting logarithmic. The constant fiddling of code and huge modification of core elements ended up introducing bugs that would have never existed, and I ended up being way too sarcastic and mean-spirited in my complaining about new bug reports, which was too much for PopCap's head tester, who is simply the best person I've ever seen at his job. I apologized to him after publication, but wanted to include this to emphasize how frazzling the final few months of Chuzzle dev was.
Okay, with all that aside, let's start poking around at differences in what happened. The elephant in the room being Chuzzle Duel, which got replaced with Mindbender. Interestingly, the concept for Chuzzle Duel was reused in Chuzzle 2, though you fight against an AI rather than a human. It'd be really cool if there was a fighting mode in Chuzzle 3 or something, just saying. The original splash screen was completely different from release. The original name was Chuzzle Gold instead of Chuzzle Deluxe. I think this was changed because PopCap wanted it to be in line with the rest of their games, where the full game has Deluxe added. Like, Bejeweled's Trial would just say Bejeweled, and the full game would say Bejeweled Deluxe. Besides that, an earlier version of the logo is present, and the background is very different. The main menu screen got some changes, but is overall the same. The layout is identical, but the colors used got changed. One of the bigger changes is the More Games button being replaced with the trophy room. In older versions, the difficulty was displayed at the top, but was removed. The background is completely different, and the menu button used to be circular rather than clickable text. The amount of scrambles you had were displayed on the bottom right of the board rather than the top right. Then there's brown Chuzzles, which weren't in the final game, though they do make their debut in Chuzzle 2. The pause screen also went through some changes. It used to have this white dot pattern around the buttons, and the star has no shading. The last in-game screenshot is Chuzzle Duel, I think. The postmortem mentions that little window above the bottle, which is here, so this is what Chuzzle Duel would have looked like. At the bottom, you can see a leaderboard displaying your name, the amount of games you played, score, and your best ever score. Now going back to the costumes mockup, one of them actually made it into the final game, being the glasses. Chuzzles have a rare chance to drop into the board wearing glasses, and one of them is the same kind seen here. But that's all the beta content I have for Chuzzle, and marks the end of this video. If you enjoyed this video, then consider spreading it around and sharing the word of Chuzzle. If Mr. Raptis is watching this, thank you for creating an amazing series, and many of us look forward to what you do next.